Hello and welcome to Dialogue. The war in Ukraine has been going for nearly 1.5 years without a clear end in sight. And just this past June, the Wagner Group incident has made the situation even more unpredictable. What really happened with the Wagner Group? How might the incident impact the war on the ground or even political stability in Russia? And what is the latest on the battlefield? To discuss these issues and more, I'm glad to sit with Kortunov Andrey, Academic Director of the Russian International Affairs Council. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Welcome to Dialogue, Mr. Kortunov. So we'll start with the Wagner rebellion. Now it's over, the short-lived rebellion. How do you characterize the current situation in the wake of the rebellion?
Well, first of all, let me say that this mutiny, if I might use this term, is an important signal to the Russian leadership. You cannot afford to have an autonomous military unit which claims its independence, which is a private military company, in the middle of a very serious conflict that you have. So everything has to be subordinated to just one center of command, and it's not the case when such autonomy should be accepted or encouraged. I hope that the Russian military command will learn its lessons and that such thing will not happen ever again.
You said last year, I quote, there was no chance for peaceful settlement to the Ukraine war anytime soon. And probably this seems more so, given, at least officially, you see the European Union in the recent summit has declared that their determination, to provide support as long as it takes. Do you see any political solution within this year or next year?
Well, I think it depends on how you define political solution. Take, for example, the situation in the Korean Peninsula. There is no war there right now between the North and the South, but there is no peace either. Legally, North Korea is still in a military conflict with the United Nations, which of course looks quite absurd, but that's the reality. So I'm afraid that we might see a situation when there is no final political settlement for a long time, but there is some kind of interim settlement which would help to avoid any future escalation. I think this is not beyond our reach, but even this very moderate goal will require a lot of effort and a lot of political courage from both sides.
When it comes to Russia, of course, Russia initiated this military operation. You pointed out that the core question is, does Russia want long-term isolation from the West or compromise and reintegration? And everything else falls into place depending on the outcome of this fateful decision. So at this stage, do you see Russian leadership, Russian government is making any decision in terms of the conflict?
Well, I think that if we are talking about Russia's relations to the West, there are certain things which cannot be reversed. For instance, if you look at the Russia-EU energy strategic partnership, I think it is gone. I don't think it can be restored anytime soon. There are some other dimensions of the relations between Russia and the West which would be very difficult, if possible, to restore. For instance, you take strategic arms control between Russia and the United States. As you probably know, Russia suspended its participation to New START. But New START expires in the beginning of 2026, and there is practically no time to replace this agreement with anything similar to New START. So we have to think about new models. So we have to turn this page and to start a new chapter.
To start a new chapter, but of course, first of all, the end of the war. Outside players, mostly from the developing world, like Brazil, like China, like other African countries, they have the delegation in Moscow and Ukraine. They try to help bring about a peaceful settlement. So, in that sense, China also made its peace proposal. Do you think countries like China, South Africa, Brazil can play a role in help probably stop the war?
Well, I might be biased in my own way here, but I think that the more proposals we have, the better it is. Because there is always something that you can get from these proposals, even if you cannot accept them in general, in detail. You take, for instance, the Chinese proposals. They do not constitute a particular roadmap, a set of actions that should be taken in a specific sequence in order to reach a peace agreement. But the Chinese proposals are important because they offer a set of principles on which the conflict, and not just this conflict, but conflicts like this one, can be resolved. So I think it's an important initiative that has to be appreciated. A lot will depend on how all these various proposals can be converted into specific plans. For instance, we spoke about a ceasefire. Suppose there is a ceasefire at some point. Then a big question is how this ceasefire is going to be monitored to prevent violations, to prevent cases of an inadvertent escalation. We had experience with Minsk II, and we had a group of observers from OSCE along the line of contact. But this experience was not ideal because both sides complained about OSCE, and even technically, institutionally, OSCE did not have enough manpower to serve the line of contact. It was about 400 miles, and they had about 700 observers, which was not enough. Now, if we reach a ceasefire, if we assume that the situation will not change dramatically in terms of the line of contact, it will be a much longer line of contact, including the Russian-Ukrainian border. It might be close to 2,000 miles. And it's clear that we will need thousands of observers, which OSCE cannot provide. That means that we have to engage the United Nations. We need to engage some other institutions and other players to provide the needed number of observers to make sure that the terms of the agreement, even this interim agreement, are honored by everybody involved. So there are many technical details, many specific issues that have to be addressed here, and the sooner we start working on these technical issues, the better it is.
Mm-hmm. Of course, there's a larger concern beyond Ukraine. For example, the West, including the U.S. and the European Union, they are providing more and more advanced weapons to the Ukrainian side. I wonder if that's a concern for Moscow, that might put Moscow at a disadvantageous position. And of course, there's also pressure, at least from some country in Europe. They want the NATO membership for Ukraine. And the former NATO secretary warned that if that failed, some other NATO members or European countries, they might provide or send their own troops to Ukraine. How much a concern is that to Moscow?
Well, it is a matter of concern, of course, because what we observe right now is a process of a gradual escalation of the U.S. engagement. A year ago, they spoke primarily of defensive systems, then they got to javelins, they got to tanks, and now they discuss aircraft and long-range missiles to be supplied to Ukraine. So we don't know, at least I don't know, where is the red line between military assistance and direct engagement. But at some point, as you said, NATO can cross this line, and then we will have a direct Russia-NATO military conflict, which would be difficult to keep at the conventional level. And of course, I don't know what the NATO summit will decide, but I don't think that it is in NATO's interest to have its boots on the ground. And at least so far, official statements coming from NATO capitals suggest that NATO does not want to get directly involved in this conflict. But of course, it's a moving target, so we have to follow the developments of the situation.
Are you seeing that, the talk of a victory, a military victory, as the end of the story by Ukraine, by the West, is not acceptable to Russia?
I think you're right. I think this is not acceptable. And I think in case NATO escalates, Russia can also escalate. And I think Russia still has a lot of capacity to escalate, to bring more troops to the battlefield, to use various types of new weapons. So I would not underestimate the capacity of the Russian leadership to escalate if such an escalation is needed. So I think everybody is interested in somehow curbing, preventing this escalation, if possible, to start de-escalating. But you need a lot of political will to do that, and you need a degree of political flexibility which so far is not easy to find. Again, I can only say that I hope that we will see more political will, and I think that maybe in a couple of months from now we will see some progress. So next time we get together, I will have more optimistic, hopefully I will have more positive news to report. But right now, I'm afraid it is too early.
Let's talk about the effects of the Ukraine crisis. Of course, the effects on Russia have been rather clear. The sanctions from the West, and of course, isolation of Russia is clear. But at the same time, we do see, it's almost like the rise of the global South. It's becoming prominent in terms of their position on the Ukraine crisis because they refuse to choose sides, despite the pressure from Washington. And at the same time, they are distancing themselves by reducing their reliance on the US dollar because they see the crushing effects on Russian economy because of the dollar advantage enjoyed by Washington. What do you make of these changes?
Well, first of all, let me say that although, of course, the pressure on Russia has been very strong, the Russian economic system has demonstrated a degree of resilience. I remember a year ago, more than a year ago, there were many experts who predicted an implosion of the Russian economy, a total collapse of the financial system, shortages of essentials, high unemployment, and also a political crisis as a result of these developments. But nothing like that happened. And I think that our government turned out to be highly professional, and it performed better than many experts expected it to perform. So from this viewpoint, Russia has demonstrated that it is stronger than probably many think it is. But speaking of the global South, I think this crisis is a challenge, but also an opportunity. It is a challenge because global South countries are also affected by the crisis. We talk a lot about the food security situation, which is not ideal, of course. And though we understand that the Ukrainian crisis is not the only factor which determines the food situation in the world, but still the crisis contributed to the volatility of food prices and to some shortages that we observe right now. The dollar, the hegemonic position of the US currency in the international system is also something that became an issue for many nations because to date it is Russia which is sanctioned. Tomorrow it might be someone else. And on top of that we see these extraterritorial sanctions against countries which dare to continue their cooperation with the Russian Federation. Of course, many countries do not like the situation, so I think that the ongoing de-dollarization of the global financial system, which is slow but steady, has got a major booster. You know, people start thinking, you know, why don't we find certain alternatives? But let me also say that, as I mentioned, it's not only a challenge but also an opportunity. It's an opportunity for many global South countries to demonstrate that they have their own positions and that they are not only objects, but they are also subjects of the international system. Because in the West, they look at the problem between the West and the global South mostly as a problem of communication. The idea is that we should explain to the global South why they should join us and why they should get away from Moscow. But it is not a problem of communication. It's a problem of interests. It's a problem of principles. It's a problem of self-perception. That's why I think that these crises created certain opportunities for the global South, and it might become a major accelerator for the global redistribution of political power.
Can we say that's like a rise of a new global order? At least we say unipolar world, you know, and the U.S. As the only superpower is gone. You know, when the Ukraine crisis, broke out, and of course the U.S. is competing with China. People would say, well, you are competing with another country. That means like you are more or less on equal power status. So the unipolar moment is gone. It's gone forever. And the U.S. now is trying or attempting to contain both Russia and China. I wonder, how likely the U.S. will succeed.
You know, my professional career is long enough to make some judgments about this emerging new world order. I remember at least 4 cases when many thought that the old order was already gone forever and something new was emerging. The first case, the first instance was after the disintegration of the Soviet Union, when many thought that, this chapter is over, and from now on we will have a new world order. If you remember,
end of history.
And the end of history, balance of interests, all European house, things like that, and we didn't have fundamental change of the global order because of the Soviet disintegration. There were some readjustments, of course, there were some changes, but it was not a radical departure from the old world order. Then in 10 years after the Soviet disintegration, we had 9/11. And again, I recall that many experts said, well, enough is enough. Now we have a common enemy, and it will be an entirely new world order. But once again, all of us were disappointed because this terrorist act did not change the fundamentals of the global politics. Later on, we had the global financial crisis of 2008 to 2009, and again, there were expectations that it would trigger some fundamental change in the international system, especially in the financial system, but not only. It was also the time of the US-Russian reset, and G20 was put in operation. Later on, we had the pandemic, and you probably remember, the expectations that pandemic will change everything, no stone will be left unturned, and we will have everything different, everything not what it was before the pandemic. So we should be cautious when we're talking about a new world order, and definitely the resilience of the old system, institutions, habits, traditions, patterns of behavior is still with us. And definitely it might survive to some extent the current crisis as well. However, having said that, I do believe that there are some very fundamental changes underway. Not all of them are directly related to the Ukrainian crisis. but the world is becoming different. The balance of powers is very different from what it was, let's say, 20 or 30 years ago. The level of interconnectivity, interdependence between nations is also different from what it was. The security situation is different, including the threat of international terrorism, radicalism, and extremism. So I think that the old world order is gradually being destroyed by multiple factors which are eroding this order. But it is too early to argue that a new world order is already emerging. I think we are still at the stage of deconstruction, and hopefully we will not be late with the stage of construction, because if we are late, then we will see an automized global politics with no rules whatsoever, and I think that will be very bad for all of us, because we need a high level of global governance and regional governance as well, just to manage these mounting problems that are dawning upon us. And that would be a tremendous task for politicians, for the private sector, for intellectuals, for opinion makers, for civil society, and so on.
What about working together for these big powers like the US, China, Russia, European Union, and other major developing nations? Do you foresee any possibility for them working together for a new world order in which people can coexist peacefully?
I would say that they'll be forced to work together if they want to survive, if all of us want to survive, because there is no other way. The pressure of common problems is likely to increase. Now we're talking about climate change, and indeed it seems that we will not meet the benchmarks, 1.5 degrees
Celsius.
Yeah, I think unfortunately it is already unattainable. I'm not sure that we will be able to limit the global warming to 2 degrees. Maybe it will be higher than that, at least by the end of century. But it's not the only problem. We can talk about biodiversity. We can talk about resource crunch. We can talk about international migrations. We can talk about how to manage transborder information flows. We can talk about international cooperation on artificial intelligence, cyberspace, very many issues. If we do not manage them, I think our civilization will be destroyed sooner or later. And I don't want to sound too pessimistic. As I said, I do believe in the instinct of self-preservation, but these are not small things. So I think that if we all want to survive, we need to work together, even if we have to make some compromises. It is very nice to take a moral position, say, I'm not going to work with this guy because I don't like him. But there is a difference between our personal relations and state-to-state relations. Max Weber at some point expressed his view that there were two types of morality. Morality of principle and morality of responsibility. If you're a private person, you can afford to take the morality of principle as you guiding rule. You can say, I will do whatever I consider to be fair and just and what resonates with my principle. But if you are a state leader, you should think about the implications of your decisions. And sometimes you make certain decisions which you do not like, but you understand that all alternatives will be much more detrimental to your country and maybe even to the humankind than the decision that you take. So the morality of responsibility is something that state leaders should always keep in mind. I hope that they will do that, and that means that a degree of cooperation between great powers is not only attainable but practically unavoidable if we want to approach specific issues successfully.
Lastly, in terms of China-U.S. relationship, for example, what we are seeing, the U.S. is pursuing a containment policy. Some would call it a new Cold War against China, in order to maintain the U.S. hegemony as the only superpower. We don't accept any rising challenger like in China here. So it's a zero-sum game almost. Like the U.S. said, we will not allow China to be in the leading position in terms of technology, for example, or military power. Zero-sum game here. Is there any way they can reach a compromise that, somehow, as you said, they can work together for the benefit of the whole world?
Well, again, that depends on how we define compromise. I think that we have to state that the relationship between China and the United States in the foreseeable future is likely to be more adversarial rather than cooperative. I think it's unfortunate. I think it might be even deplorable, but I don't think that we can get back to where we were, let's say, 10 years ago. But if the relationship is adversarial, it doesn't mean that this adversarial relationship cannot be managed. So a lot will depend on the specific agreements that might or might not be reached between Beijing and Washington. For instance, they talk a lot about de-risking or even about strategic decoupling in the United States. But what does it mean specifically? I think that we can probably expect that China and the United States will compete in high tech. It is hard for me right now to imagine that China and the United States will cooperate actively in artificial intelligence or in quantum computing. I think, again, it's unfortunate because we need synergy, we need everybody working together, but I think it's not realistic to expect that this cooperation will continue. But does it imply that China and the United States should enter into a full-fledged trade war? I don't think so. I think that it is possible to maintain a high degree of economic interdependence between the two nations, because in the end of the day, the US consumer needs, I would say badly needs, made in China stuff. And if you deprive him or her from this stuff, then the US households will suffer a lot. We also understand that Chinese students are welcomed in many US universities, and I think universities in the United States would probably fight against restrictions in educational cooperation. And there are many other areas in which China and the United States can work together, even if we assume that this relationship is likely to be adversarial. Maybe later on, this adversarial relationship will turn into more cooperative. I think that the ball is essentially on the US court, because the United States has, at some point, to accept China as an equal partner. And I think that for the let's say for the Biden generation of US political leaders, it is impossible to accept China as an equal partner. But we will see a generational change in the US leadership as well. Maybe the new generation of US leaders will be more flexible and more accommodative, and maybe the idea of the US hegemony will be replaced by something different, something more innovative and something more productive.
Thank you, Mr. Kortunov. Thank you for talking with us.
Thank you for inviting me.